The Dreamcast. If there were ever a way to make an exit from the console wars, as far as game library goes, they had a nice way of departing from the race. Sega's first-party output was phenomenal. The Sonic Adventure games, Skies of Arcadia, Shenmue, Jet Set Radio, just to name a few. But with such a library as this, apparently one so highly esteemed, why is it that Sega would have departed from consoles at all? What happened that made the maker of the Genesis and Sonic the Hedgehog's franchise have to bow out from the continuing drama of the console wars? Well, as it turns out, there's several reasons why the Dreamcast collapsed. Some circumstantial, some blunders in execution. The failures of Sega's previous consoles are a major contributor, the Sega Saturn being kind of the prime offender here. Its release was a tragedy. Despite originally disclosing a release date prior to E3 95, it was later said at the event that it was already available at certain retailers, catching many stores and consumers off guard. It was a move that was supposed to be cool. It was just confusing, and it threw off the attention of everyone that Sega should have been working with. The Saturn was also $100 more expensive than the first Sony PlayStation, and it released not too long before it. It released and then trailed the two leading competitors, the Nintendo 64 and the PlayStation, and Sega would kneecap the system too early, with the Saturn enjoying a lifetime of only 3 years, far too short for a major console. And that says nothing of underwhelming adoption and commercial performance for other platforms such as the Game Gear. Sega was just taking major hits financially. In order to compete in the console wars, namely against the PlayStation 2, which was already a nightmare to deal with since it had a built-in DVD player, and enjoyed immense support from developers following the success of the first PlayStation, Sega more than once cut the price of the Dreamcast, but this was a pretty costly move to make. As stated, Sega's books weren't healthy to begin with, and if you're developing something like the Dreamcast, with its online capabilities and costly components, this creates additional financial difficulty for Sega. The timing of the launch of the Dreamcast wasn't great either. It was the first participant in its generation of the console wars, releasing in Japan in 1998 and everywhere else in 1999. But the PlayStation 2 was announced in 1999 as well, and the GameCube was announced in the following year. During the time leading up to the launch of both consoles, the Nintendo 64 and PlayStation were sold at lowered prices. These were two consoles which were obviously more attractive than the Sega Saturn, but the Saturn was irrelevant at this point, with its limited life and library. Those two consoles, however, didn't have a limited life and had a great wealth of games for people to buy or even rent. Lest some of us forget, this was the time that rental services, such as Blockbuster, were particularly prevalent. And sure, the Dreamcast may have launched for a cheaper price of $199, compared to the PlayStation 2's price of $299, but in the minds of gamers and developers, the value proposition was just lacking compared to the PS2. DVD players were new at the time, and they were expensive. Long before game consoles existed as the entertainment behemoths that they do now, what with all the app integrations and so on, there was the master stroke of the PS2 playing DVDs. It's also worth noting that game discs for the Dreamcast held much less data in comparison to DVDs, and so while the Dreamcast launched with a noticeable head start in comparison to its competitors, it wouldn't be able to capitalize on this head start. We should probably also note that while the Sega brand is host to major IPs such as Sonic the Hedgehog, the appeal of the Sonic brand was often relegated to kids back during the time of the Genesis, and on the whole, Sega didn't have a library of IPs that could compete with what Sony had quickly amassed, to say nothing of the frightening IP list that Nintendo had under its belt. Sure, Sonic Adventure completely rewrote Sonic the Hedgehog and is an enduring classic, but Sony and Nintendo have way more than just Sonic the Hedgehog. Despite Sega's next-level mind game in announcing the release date, third-party developers would go on to pick up the system and develop games for it. However, EA Sports, Squaresoft, and Rockstar North didn't make any games for it. While a number of major names did make Dreamcast games, these are still some important omissions. The Dreamcast also launched with the built-in modem and would later have a broadband adapter released for it, but while these are amazing features and were capitalized on with titles such as Phantasy Star Online Episode 1, broadband access was not widely available or used by all customers. Of course, the succeeding console generation would see online play as essential, despite the variable execution, such as with the Nintendo Wii. But we should probably also bring up the fact that the Dreamcast did not have a very friendly-to-hold controller in comparison to how simple the PlayStation 2's controller was. You really can't say much for the Xbox controller either, and it's hard to say what the plan was for the GameCube controller, but still, the PS2's controller's convenience could not be beat. And so that's what happened to the Dreamcast. It was a mixture of brilliance and poor decision-making, online services that were way too far ahead of their time, a highly palatable launch price point, and a library that was ultimately a treat for gamers. But in the eyes of management, after enduring continued failures in the console space, and seeing that other competitors' consoles were immensely strong, they just weren't interested in continuing to participate in that race. seeing only the continued risks and lack of proper successes that would have made another console more easily justifiable. That being said, the Dreamcast is an amazing system with a great library, hosting great exclusives. It was the first way the world experienced the Sonic Adventure games, and besides that, it was host to a variety of other franchises: Power Stone, Soul Calibur, Sakura Wars, Jet Set Radio, Space Channel 5, Samba de Amigo, Choo Choo Rocket, the list just goes on. SEGA threw some serious first-party weight into trying to make the Dreamcast work, but there were other forces at work that the games alone couldn't fight. So, with that said, name some of your favorite Dreamcast games, exclusive or otherwise. Skies of Arcadia, which was only ever re-released for the GameCube, has to be one of my favorite Dreamcast games, if not my favorite game overall. Let us know your thoughts of the Dreamcast below. Do you still hope for SEGA to return someday to the console wars? And that wraps it up. If you like what we're doing, please consider subscribing to our channel. We upload new videos daily. Also, don't forget to switch on the bell notification icon, that way you don't miss out on any of our videos.